So we've seen a little bit about how to manipulate 3D layers. I've added another couple of 3D layers into my scene, and we're in Axis Modes AEP, which you can find in the Introduction to 3D folder. Now I'm going to rotate those, and I'm going to open up the rotation value by hitting R, and notice that opens up orientation and rotation. I don't really need to see all of that, so what I'm going to do instead is go up here and type in orientation, and it will open up orientation for each of those layers for me. Now I'll select all three of them and just rotate them by 90 degrees. And I want you to watch what happens to this three-way axis, which indicates our X, Y, and Z value. If I rotate each of them by 90 degrees, notice that the X, Y, and Z values in this window no longer really represent their true axis. And we're in local axis mode at the moment. And when you're in local axis mode, the axis will remain local to the layer. Now, what's strange about that is if I now select these three layers and hit P to open up my position value, and I scrub what I think is the Z value, you'll notice that down in the timeline, it's actually the Y value that's moving. Now, why is that? Well, because the axis is rotated with the layer, it no longer represents backwards and forwards. It represents up and down, if you like. But you can change the axis mode, so you can go to world axis mode. And in world axis mode, the Y will always control the Y value down in the timeline. The X will always control the X value in the timeline, and the Z will always control the Z value. It's important that you understand these, because if you open a project and someone's set it to a different mode, you need to be aware of what's happening with these axes. Now, the only other one that's available is this one, View Axis Mode, and you'll notice that that changed again. And if I select the camera tool now and move around that view, notice that as I move, the axis is moving as well to try and maintain its position within the view, if you like. So it's trying to keep X always facing forwards, Y always up and down, and Z from left to right. So if I scrub that value using the position, notice that down in the timeline, X, Y, and Z are all changing. And I'm not really getting the behavior I would expect. So basically, while you're learning, I recommend that you stay in world axis view, because then when you're moving things up in the composition panel, you always know what's what in terms of X, Y, and Z value, and you're only moving it on the axis that you expect to be moving it on. Now, the other thing we're going to do is scale those up a little bit. So let's just hit S to bring up scale, and then just increase the scale value. And I'm going to now select cog 2 and just move it over using my axes. So we have our two cogs next to each other. Now I really want to interlock them, so what I'm going to do is just solo them for a second. And then I'm going to look from my top view, and we'll zoom in using the camera tool. So if you don't have a 3-button mouse, use the Track Z camera tool. Now you'll find with Track Z that you can't get a lot of movement with the mouse. So if you hold down Shift as you're scrubbing, you'll get a little bit more purchase to it. And then we can just move that up and move the cog towards the other one, going back to the selection tool by hitting V. And then all we need to do is just rotate one of them a little bit. So let's open up R for rotation. We can also rotate using the rotation tool. So I could select the rotation tool, and I want to rotate it around the Y-axis just a little bit so that they interlock. I'm then going to add a little bit of animation to those, so we'll animate that Y value changing over time. Now you'll notice that when I rotate using the rotation tool, it actually rotates orientation. So if I then want to animate, I would set a keyframe for Y rotation, move to the end, and I would either rotate the value by scrubbing it down here in the timeline. Whoops, wrong one. And you'll notice that my axis modes don't match what's happening down here in the timeline. You'll see, because we're in world axis mode, it's not showing us the layer-based axis. So let's go back to local axis mode, and we can see that it should actually be the Z axis that we're rotating over time. So I'm going to scrub the red axis to get my animation in there. Okay, and of course I didn't set a keyframe for that, so we'll set a keyframe, go back to the beginning, right-click and reset the property, and we get a bit of animation happening. Now you'll notice it's previewing this one. If I want to preview this one, I can say preview this view, and it will always preview that view. Okay, so we'll also animate the other cog and get them moving and use them as a platform to put our characters on in the next step.